Hi everyone, welcome to today's PortSwigginar on the topic of Burp Suite Enterprise Edition. So we have a mixture of users on the call today, some of whom may have seen the product a long time ago, some more recently, and some who may never have seen the product before. But just before we get going, we'll just do a little bit of housekeeping. So I'm Sophie Stevenson. I'm part of the Enterprise Advocate team here at PortSwigger. I work with our trialists and customers to ensure they get the required support to evaluate or procure Burp Suite Enterprise Edition. Alex?
Yeah, hi folks. So Alex, I work with the technical support team. So we help our customers with the day-to-day support for both professional and enterprise. And today I'll be running us through the demo.
We also have Adam, James, Maya and Hannah in the background today, managing the Q&A facility in the Zoom toolbar. If you want to ask any questions, please use the Zoom toolbar during this session. We will try and respond to them all as quickly as we can, but we'll also be picking out some questions at the end during the Q&A. Don't worry if we don't manage to answer all your questions during the session, as we will be following up via email with the answers. Just to let you all know, this session is also being recorded and it'll be available on the PortSwigger YouTube channel if you want to watch anything back or if you want to send the link to any members of your team. And finally, the next session will be on the 10th of August. So if you do have any colleagues that would benefit from attending, please let us know and we can extend the invite. So just as a quick recap of the agenda, we'll be discussing the different versions of Burp Suite. So that's both professional and enterprise. We'll cover the new features and enhancements within Burp Suite Enterprise Edition. And following that, we'll touch on our licensing model, which will lead us nicely into the product overview, which will feature new deployment methods, how to get scanning quickly, integrations with CI/CD pipelines and issue tracking tools, and then a sneak peek into our 2022 roadmap and round the webinar off, as I mentioned, with a Q&A session. So don't worry if you don't get a chance to make notes on all of this. As I said, the recording will be available on the PortSwigger YouTube channel and emailed out to you. So, our Burp Suite products. So many of you will be familiar with and likely use Burp Suite Professional, which is our manual penetration testing toolkit with features such as proxy, intruder, and repeater. Burp Suite Enterprise and Professional both use the infamous Burp scanner. So Burp Suite Enterprise uses a scanner to carry out automated web vulnerability testing, and these scans can be triggered by the inbuilt scheduler or via integration with a CI/CD pipeline, something that Alex will demonstrate later in the session. The main reason we wanted to highlight this is that it's often thought that Pro and Enterprise are a tiered product set, but in fact, they are designed to be used to complement each other. Burp Suite Enterprise to provide the automated scanning and faster feedback earlier in the software development lifecycle, and then Professional for the more targeted manual testing. In fact, the majority of our Burp Suite Enterprise Edition customers use Professional as well. If you do need any further clarification, then please let the team know in the Q&A box here on Zoom. So for those of you on the call who may not have seen the product for a few years, it's worth a quick recap on what's new. I'm not going to cover all the items and it's by no means an exhaustive list, but just to mention a few things. We have enhanced reporting on scan results against specific compliance frameworks. So that's including PCI DSS and the OWASP Top 10. You can now deploy Enterprise Edition to your existing Kubernetes cluster much more easily using a Helm chart. And Alex will give you a bit more detail on this shortly. And for those of you that are Pro users, you should be familiar with our BAP store. So the new 2021.8 release added support for Burp extensions in Burp Suite Enterprise Edition, but it's just worth noting that not all extensions are available in Pro are available in Enterprise, and that's because the Enterprise extensions have to be written in Java, and there's not that same ability to change the UI as there is in Pro. We've also added support for bulk actions in the UI. allowing you to add sites, move and delete sites and folders, launch quick scans, or cancel and delete scans, all in bulk, whereas previously this was done per action. And finally, we have made huge improvements to Burp Scanner in terms of its ability to scan single-page applications that are now synonymous with modern web architecture. So, how is Burp Suite Enterprise Edition licensed? So it's licensed on concurrent scans. We don't limit you a number of applications, domains, URLs, users, or anything else, only on concurrent scans. And unlike most automated web vulnerability scanners, Enterprise Edition scans can be assigned and reassigned across any applications, websites, or URLs. We often get asked, how many concurrent scans do I need? And the answer is, it all depends on the size of your organization and how secure you aim to be. So obviously companies with large web portfolios that need to scan frequently will need more scanning resources than small companies who are just starting out with automated scanning. So just to look at an example, if you have 500 applications, you're probably not scanning them all day, every day. More realistically, you might be hitting 50 apps a day with a combination of scheduled scans and scans triggered by your CI/CD pipeline. So assuming your scan times fit into a working day, you only need to license 50 concurrent scans. So if you kicked off more scans than you had available, they would just be queued until they're free. In terms of pricing, Burp Suite Enterprise Edition license with one concurrent scan, which is the minimum, would be $4,999. And each additional concurrent scan would be $499 US. So just as an example, a Burp Suite Enterprise Edition license with 50 concurrent scans would cost you $29,450 US. And this is based off a 12-month subscription. However, we do offer multi-year subscriptions for up to 10 years as well. And then architecture and deployment, I'm going to hand you over to Alex, and he's going to take you through the next bit.
Okay, folks. So we'll just quickly cover off the architecture behind Enterprise and look at the two deployment options, and then we'll jump into the demo and take a look at the product. So in terms of those core components, Enterprise is comprised of a web server for access, an enterprise server, which is going to handle all the business logic behind the scenes. And then we'll have one or more scanning machines, which are the entities that actually perform the scans. And think of these as your automated penetration testers effectively. All of those components will connect to some form of SQL database, and there's a few different options there. And then naturally, we've got our users or API clients accessing that through the web server. In terms of deployment options, we've got the standard installation method, which is basically choosing your OS of choice. That's Windows, various flavors of Linux, or Mac OS. And then you would run our installer on top of that. And effectively, as long as it's 64-bit and can run Java 11, you're probably going to be good to go from a deployment perspective. And then that standard installation process can either be single machine or multi-system, which we'll cover off in a second. And then second option is the Kubernetes deployment, which is quite a new release for us. So if you've got more of a preference around containerization, then this is the choice for you. So this is deployed via a provided Helm chart. And again, that works with any x86-based cluster. There are some prerequisites to meet, but the idea is kind of irrespective of your infrastructure. As long as you meet those, you should be able to run them on a cluster of your choice. This also gives us the advantage of auto-scaling scanning machines. So whereas with the standard installer, we pre-provision those scanning machines, i.e. we create the resource, be it a VM or physical machine, and then kind of sit there either scanning or not scanning. With Kubernetes, we can take advantage of that cluster architecture, and actually we don't pre-provision the scanning machines. They are created when a scan job is created. The scan job will run, and then when it finishes, the scanning machine will be killed off, and naturally that has a net benefit in terms of cost for a cloud environment, effectively pay as you use. So for the standard installer single machine deployment, as the name sounds, all of those components that we discussed are deployed to a single physical or virtual machine. This is great for a trial or evaluation purpose, nice and easy to get up and running. all the components live together, and you're scanning pretty much straight away. And you can see some of the connectivity that is required there. So, for example, out to PortSwigger.net, that's for the license activation and automated updates. Users will access the web server over the default port of 8080, but that can be changed and secured if required. Burp Collaborator is also used for those pro users. It works in the same way. And these are effectively for your sort of out-of-bound payload type attacks. And then naturally you need to be able to target those websites that you want to scan, either HTTP or S. Multi-system is where the notion of scale comes in with Burp Suite Enterprise. So the idea that we can be running dozens, hundreds, thousands of scans at the same time. So we start to separate those components out. So the web server and enterprise server will still live together. You might still use our bundled H2 database. Most customers would choose their own external database. And again, we've got a list, a document that details what those can be. And also the scanning machine will be deployed externally. You can deploy as many of these as you like and distribute your concurrent scan limit from a license perspective as you kind of see fit. And again, there's some best practice around how many scans per scanning machine relative to CPU and RAM. That's all documented on our website. Connectivity-wise, it's all the same. We're still talking to the same components. But again, because we can deploy as many scanning machines as we wish, we can support a large environment from a scanning perspective. If you want to go down the Kubernetes route, you need to meet these three prerequisites. So we used to provide options for CloudFormation and ARM templates, but those are fairly restrictive in terms of the infrastructure. So now you just need some sort of ingress solution. So that's typically going to be a load balancer or ingress controller. You'll need a persistent volume claim. So that'll be application name that you give it, -PVC, and that needs to be shared by all the nodes in the namespace. And then to enable the cluster autoscaler must be installed and enabled as well. So with these prerequisites met, you'll be able to deploy to AWS, GCP, private cluster, etc. So in terms of what that looks like, there's kind of a split of the responsibilities, i.e. what we give you in terms of the Helm chart and then what you would need to provide. So for Mr. or Mrs. Customer, ingress, web service, and the database. Now we still do have documentation around deploying the database and the scripts, etc. It's just that that's external to the Helm chart as such. And then for the Helm chart, web server pod, enterprise service, enterprise server pod will be deployed, and then the scanner pod is effectively managed by the enterprise server itself. We do have a reference template available for AWS if you don't necessarily want to deploy or have your own cluster. I'm going to bring those out for Azure and GCP and other platforms as we move forward. So we've put everything together that we've learned around the architecture and the licensing. This is what a typical purchase and deployment would look like. So you've bought Burp Suite Enterprise license with 15 concurrent scans because you've determined from the trial that's a suitable number from a concurrency perspective. You decided that you want to deploy to AWS EC2 using the standard installation process multi-machine. So we deploy an image with the enterprise and web server, and then same for an external database, Postgres in this case. And then we need to decide how we want to distribute those concurrent scans. So along the lines of best practice, we're going to deploy 3 scanning machines, each enabled with 5 concurrent scans, giving us our 15 in total. And that's a good spread from a resource perspective as well, particularly around performance. So perhaps throughout that 12-month subscription in this example, our applications might scale in terms of our portfolio. We might need to run more scans. So that concurrency can scale with you too. So at any point you can add additional scan concurrency. In this case, we've deployed another scanning machine and assigned an additional 5 concurrent scans to it. So from a purchase perspective, that initial purchase with the 15 will be $11,985 US across a 1-year subscription. And then at some point we've added those 5, which is going to be $2,495. That'll be prorated against the subscription as well. All nice and straightforward. So with the architecture and deployment options out the way, we'll jump to the demo and just give you a sort of look and feel and some of the changes that have been made around the interface. So straight away, our first task is probably going to be to set up our team. So we do have role-based access control. Enterprise, in contrast to Pro, is very much designed to be team-based. So we have roles that we can create with a set of permissions, i.e. what we want that particular user to be able to do. Got some pre-built roles here, but you have complete control to create a role as you see fit. So if I go to new role, we can see here, got a list of permissions for effectively everything that you can do within the UI. And then you can assign those roles to groups and add your users into groups for easier management. Now, those are local users. So if we jump into integrations, we'll also see that we do support SAML and LDAP. So if you'd rather pass across an existing group of users, either AD or from your identity provider, that's supported as well. And if you just want those to be managed in terms of authentication, but have more direct management over the groups, we've got a skin module for that. Once our team is set up, we'll probably want to check out our scanning machines. So we can see this deployment is a single machine deployment with a local scanning machine. We can see our local IP here, but I could deploy as many external scanning machines as I wish and link those back to this installation. And we'll see our license limit down here. So this is a trial. And with the trial, you get 35 concurrent scans with which to test with. And then you'll see these toggle buttons. I can distribute those 35 amongst the scanning machines as I see fit. So it's kind of where I need those resources to be. I can define those into scanning pools. That's potentially a collection of scanning machines tied to particular sites. So from, again, a resource allocation perspective, that can be quite useful. And then as I allocate scans, that concurrency will be filled up until it becomes busy. And then scans would queue if I kept assigning scans. Maybe I would increase that limit if need be under certain scenarios. But essentially, once a scan finishes and it is freed up, that queued scan would then kick off. So we've got our team set up, our scanning machines are good to go, and the premise of scanning is very straightforward. So we want to create sites or target applications and then run a scan schedule on top of those sites. So all the configuration is done at site level, and the scans are effectively just our schedule. So as a new deployment, maybe we've got lots of sites with which we want to import. So we have a CSV template designed to just do exactly that. So we can populate all our sites in one go. But very quickly, if I show you what it looks like to create a new site, so we'll give it a name. We can distribute that into folders. So we can see earlier, we've got this carved out. Could be team, could be geographical location, however you see fit. And then we need to complete our site scope. So this is going to be the highest level URL that we want to include as part of the scan. And then we can use the inclusive and exclusive rules to define that even further. By default, that's always going to be HTTPS, or I can specify one of those specific protocols. And then it comes to configuring the scan itself, which again is taken from that site configuration. And a very recent addition that we've added are these preset scan modes designed to get you up and running as quick as possible. We've got some different choices there. So for example, you might have a daily lightweight scan that you just run every single day because it's designed to run over 15 minutes. And it just gives me a quick sort of insight into how that application's doing. And then perhaps I'll have another schedule whereby I run a more thorough scan, so perhaps the deep one, which has enhanced coverage in terms of the crawl and audit. And maybe I run that on a weekly basis to get a deeper insight into those vulnerabilities or issues. Now, I still have complete control over that configuration as well. So maybe I've created a custom one, or I want to use one of the pre-built scan configurations. So if we use a drop-down list here, we can start to control things around the crawl, audit, maybe want to minimize false positives. And any custom scan configurations you add will be added to this library as well. If our scan is requiring authentication, we can add that here as well. So very basic login credentials, username, password. Anything more complex than that, and we would use our recorded login sequence. This is a plugin in the browser, and it records you logging into the application. So anything along the lines of multi-page SSO authentication, that's more suitable to recorded login sequence. And we can cut and paste the JSON that is generated from that process, and the crawler will use that every time it wants to log into the application. We can also add extensions, as Sophie mentioned earlier. So again, this might be changing the behavior of a configuration. We could be adding something in, and then we can assign our scan pool as well. So once we've created that site, we would then want to start our scans. So you can see here, we've got a whole bunch of scans that have been running on a scheduled basis previously. So if I go to new scan, you can run one ad hoc. So I select my site. That's going to run as soon as possible and run it once. But ideally, I want to be creating my schedules because I want to build out that sort of picture over time or a security posture for my application. And the schedule is the best way to do that. Again, I can create different schedules, daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, and match scan configurations to those types of activities. I can schedule for a date and time and then repeat it. I could do that forever, repeat a set number of times, or until a particular date. And then I would just save that schedule, or it would run straight away if I had an ad hoc site on the go. So if I jump into an older scan that's been run, this is what the dashboard looks like from a scan results perspective, and I can start to analyze those results. So we get our list of issues. So that's carved out into either severity rating and confidence. So high, medium, low, and informational, and then certain, firm, tentative, or perhaps a false positive that we've marked. But we can start to drill down into this detail, and I'll select a location where the vulnerability has been found, and I'll be presented with the advisory. So issue detail, background information, remediation steps specific to that vulnerability. There'll always be some kind of reference to our Web Security Academy, which pro users might be familiar with, and a sandbox environment where I can carry out that particular payload, and the classifications for that particular vulnerability as well. I can view the request and the response. And if upon further investigation, I determine that actually this might be a false positive, I can mark it as such. And I've got some sort of global rules around that, how I kind of carry it forward. So maybe I just mark this one particular issue. But if I'm going to run further scans and I don't want it to be picked up again, I can do it for the site or the site and the URL. If I go back to my results, we can look at reporting and logs as well. So I can generate a HTML report with either a summary or detailed report, which is great for other lines of business that might want to investigate or report on the issues that have been found for an application scan. And we've quite recently added some compliance reporting as well. So our initial edition is OWASP Top 10 and PCI DSS. So that's going to classify the scan results into those particular sets of compliance reports. And our plan is to expand this in the future as well. So that's kind of the Scan 101. Again, the idea around importing all of our sites and creating that schedule, and then we can get that sort of longer term view. So if I look at one of the sites that have been running, again, we start to build that picture over time. So security posture, what issues have been resolved, have any regressed, and start to map that out. And then I might want to start building out integrations for my installation as well. So if I go into integrations here, we can do things like issue tracking. So Jira, GitLab, and Trello have been added so far, both for manual and automatic ticket creation. So where we marked that false positive earlier, if this was configured, we'd also have the option to raise a Jira ticket, for example, or perhaps it's automatically going to do it based on the severity and confidence level of any issues that have been found. Slack can also be configured from a notification perspective in terms of scans in progress, scans finishing. And then quite a large use case for enterprise are the pipeline scans. So we've got an example here of Jenkins. So we have specific plugins for both Jenkins and TeamCity, but then there's also the generic driver, which effectively works with anything as long as you can run the jar file. Typically, that's going to work with other platforms such as Azure DevOps, Bitbucket, etc. But the notion is that we're giving that awareness to Jenkins to insert a scan into our pipeline, and we know what issues are being found so that we can fail the build if we need to. So if I jump into configure, what the plugin or the driver is giving us is some very specific build steps related to scans. So Burp site-driven scan and Burp scan are our two options. Site-driven scan being our typical recommendation, because we're pulling all of that site configuration data at the site level. So there's very little actually to do in terms of the pipeline scan. But if, for example, you didn't know where the application was being deployed to for a particular pipeline, and you needed to be a bit more dynamic in terms of the URL, we could use the Burp scan and just echo that out as we do it. We connect to our enterprise server via the URL and GraphQL API key, and then we populate our site list from that integration so we can select which site we want to scan as part of that pipeline, select when we want the build to fail, so again on that severity or confidence level. Perhaps we actually want to permit a certain number of issues if we've got a threshold we want to kind of meet. And as a developer, if I'm controlling this process, I can actually generate a report from this pipeline scan as well and choose where that's going to be stored. But naturally, you also have access to the GraphQL API and all of the mutations that are available, so I can interact with Enterprise in any way I kind of see fit as a developer. Okay, folks, that's the demo from a kind of 101 perspective. If you need more detail, we'd absolutely encourage you to reach out or even perhaps go for the trial itself. And we've got some cool new features coming out that we'll discuss in a sec. To you, Soph.
Cool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our roadmap. So we make our roadmap public. So it's available directly from our site, and it just gives you a bit of an idea in terms of what a dev team is currently working on and new features and functionality that you can expect to see in 2022. So we did promise you a sneak peek of the roadmap and some new features that have just been released, and some upcoming features that are due to be released. So back over to Alex for a sneak peek.
Okay, so we already mentioned the preset scan configuration modes that have come out very recently, and these have been received very well. So I'd absolutely encourage you to give these a go. We've got a target application that we've developed ourselves, designed to kind of reflect a modern web application. So you very quickly, in terms of getting set up, you're able to use that as a test case as well. We're also introducing this concept of the timeline for scans. So it's all sort of well and good, creating that schedule, kicking off scans, looking at results. Sometimes you'll probably want to know the progress of scans as well. So that's the concept of the timeline giving you that sort of feedback. So you split everything up into the stages that the scan will go through, and it's going to give you feedback in terms of what's going on. So you can see here, we've just kicked off the scan, so it's queued, waiting to be assigned to an available scanning machine. The scan will start. Then we'll enter the crawl phase, and we'll start to see things like the requests being made, unique locations, and the current URL it's up to. Same goes for auditing. When we hit the audit phase, we're going to start to see those issues being generated, and again, which URL we're currently looking at. And we'll also get feedback in terms of any notifications or errors that we might need to address. Will be fed back here as well. And then we know when the scan is finished, we can take a look at those results.
Cool, so that brings us to the Q&A. So thank you to everyone who've popped their questions into the Q&A box. So I'm just going to have a quick read and pick out a couple to answer now. As I said previously, if we don't answer your question on the session today, don't worry. We're going to be sending out an email later this week with the answer to all the questions that were asked anyway. So just to kick us off then, someone has asked, we use Azure DevOps for our CI/CD pipeline. Does Enterprise integrate with this?
So yeah, as you mentioned, we've got the generic driver or platform agnostic driver, which you'll be able to utilize with Azure DevOps as a batch script effectively. So if you take a look at the documentation on our website for the generic driver, it'll give you an example of a script you can use along with some optional parameters that you can build out with that command. But again, feel free to reach out to us if you need any assistance with that.
Thanks, Alex. The next one, can I get another trial to test the new features, as it's been a while since my last trial? The answer, absolutely. We will be reaching out via an email the next couple of days. So if you're a person that would like a new free 30-day trial of Enterprise, please just reply to the email, let us know, and we'll get you set up with a new trial license. Why are not all of the BAP store extensions available for Enterprise?
So the professional extensions are typically built specifically with professional in mind in terms of the UI, and that won't translate to work with Enterprise because naturally the UIs are completely different. Additionally, currently Enterprise extensions are only written in Java. That's what it supports. And quite often you'll find the professional extensions written in Python or a combination of the two. So again, they're not automatically going to be compatible. Most of our BAPs are community-based, and we do publish the framework for making your own. So if there's anything you see that is available in Pro and doesn't currently work in Enterprise, you can reach out to us or even have a go at making your own as well.
Thanks, Alex. Just want to be sure I'll not be limited to the number of applications I can scan or the number of users. So that's absolutely right. There's no limit on users, URLs, domains. The only limit is on scan concurrency, and that's dictated by the number of concurrent scans that you purchase. This is unlike most automated web vulnerability scanners that with Burp Suite Enterprise Edition, the scans can be assigned and reassigned across any number of websites, applications, and URLs. And just to finish us off, does the concurrent scan limit apply to the same application which gets triggered parallelly by different developers in the CI/CD pipeline?
Okay, yes. I mean, there's no limit on the number of developers that can interact either via the API or via a pipeline. But any scans created will count towards that concurrency limit. So you'll definitely want to factor in when you're trying to determine how many sort of concurrent scans you might need. So just to kind of give a bit more flavor to that, if we come back to our Jenkins deployment here, if I build this with that scan step added, what it's effectively doing is initiating an API-based scan back to my enterprise install. So if I come back and go to scans, we'll see here that a scan has been kicked off. Go back to my scanning machine. You can see now one's been assigned, so it does count towards that concurrency. So something to factor in. And probably one thing just to mention around the whole sort of pipeline notion is that we are actually looking to move away from the driver. So we do get a lot of questions. Does your driver support XYZ in terms of the platform? Well, we're moving towards containerization, so that question's almost a moot point, or will be a moot point, because as a container, it's going to work with anything.
So as I mentioned before, any of your questions that haven't been answered via the chat or live today, we will be sending out an email to make sure that everybody's questions do get an answer. And so just watch out for that email. If you've got any further questions, feel free just to reply to that email and obviously let us know. So in terms of what happens next, as I just said, responses sent via email, and the PortSwigginar will be available on YouTube shortly. If you want to forward it to any of your colleagues or anybody else that it would be of interest to, please feel free to do so. For those that asked if you would like another trial, just get in contact, reach out. And if you're currently trialing, you do have access to support, but if you're unsure how to use it or you do have any additional questions, please feel free just to reach out and reply to our email. And finally, if you're an existing customer and you've scaled up a little bit since you purchased your license and you would like some more concurrent scans, please feel free, reach out, reply to our email and let us know. So that's all for today's Swigginar. Thank you so much to everybody that has joined, and hopefully we'll speak to you soon.
Thanks all.
Thanks. Bye.